We got big voting right victories in Georgia, Nebraska, and Alabama. Welcome back to Democracy Docket. I'm Marc Elias.
And I'm Paige Moskowitz. Let's get started. Marc, a ton of good voting news today. Let's start in Georgia, where last night a judge blocked a new rule passed by the state election board that would have required poll workers to hand count all of the ballots cast on election day. Give us the latest.
You're right, Paige. This has been a great little run here for the good guys in court. And let's start with the most important in the Peach State in Georgia, where the state election board, controlled by MAGA, they passed this rule that required the hand counting of ballots at the precinct level. And this was potentially going to slow things down. It was going to gum up the works. It served no useful purpose. There were a series of lawsuits filed to challenge this rule. And in a late night ruling, a state court judge blocked that rule, saying it's too much, too late. And so with that court injunction in place, we will be spared all of the nonsense that the Republicans are trying to do on that case. But, you know, Paige, election officials and Republicans and Democrats have had to file 7 lawsuits challenging this rules and others passed by the state election board because they are up to no good on that board.
Right. We've talked about this board before. You can click the link above to watch the video to learn more. But we've really been seeing a series of actions happen in Georgia lately that are trying to undermine the confidence in our elections. Also, earlier this week, the same Georgia judge ruled that election officials have a mandatory duty to certify elections. That came about in a lawsuit filed by a Republican member of the Fulton County Election Board, Julie Adams. She was trying to get the court to say that election officials have the option to certify. It's not mandatory for them to do so. The judge said, no, Georgia law is clear. You need to certify elections. The same judge blocked this hand counting rule. And like you mentioned, there are a total of 7 lawsuits challenging 6 recent rules passed by the Georgia State Election Board. The board has earned criticism from Republicans and Democrats and local election officials across the state who are all saying it is just too close to the election to change the rules now.
Yeah, they're also trying to make the rules harder, right? I mean, it's not just it's too late to change the rules. It's what they're trying to change the rules to do. And this 5-member board, which was intended to pass sort of basic administrative rules to make sure that there is fair and uniform election administration across the state, it got taken over by MAGA members, right? So 3 of the 5 members of this board, Donald Trump called out by name at a political rally. And they have been passing these rules one after another in an effort to upend the normal election administration process in this state, as you point out, at the last minute. They were aided, as you also pointed out, and it shouldn't go without noting that one of those cases, the Adams case you mentioned, is actually brought by an election denier board member who says, hey, yeah, I want to investigate. I don't want to necessarily have to certify election results I don't agree with. And she lost that case. But this board has been doing everything it can to undermine confidence in the election process, to undermine the ability of these local election officials to do their job. And it is good to see that the courts are not going to have any of this, and they have shut this down. And I expect we will see more positive rulings from even more courts in the days to come in Georgia.
We have a full breakdown of all of the recent rules passed by the Georgia State Election Board up on our website now. And like we said, this ruling came down in one of the 7 lawsuits the State Election Board is currently facing. So make sure you're subscribed to Democracy Docket's free daily and weekly newsletters so you don't miss any litigation updates in those cases. Moving on to Alabama, a federal judge today ordered the state to stop conducting a voter purge. Alabama said that it was targeting non-citizens in a voter purge, but they were actually canceling the registrations of naturalized citizens of lawful voters. As a result of this court order, Alabama will have to restore all of those voter registrations, as well as reach out and contact the voters whose registrations were canceled to let them know that their registrations are once again active and they are eligible to cast a ballot this fall.
Good news out of Alabama. I mean, how often do we get to say that?
Very rarely, but when it happens, we love to celebrate it.
Right? I mean, here it is. We're saying good news for voting rights in the state of Alabama. You may remember that Alabama announced in August it was doing a voter purge, which is in violation of federal law because there is this quiet period in the run up to elections where states can't do it. Alabama announced they were doing it anyway. By the way, Virginia, another state that announced they were doing it. Virginia's like, hey, Alabama, hold my beer. You think you can purge late? We can even purge later. But the Department of Justice and some local groups filed a lawsuit saying this was in violation of the 90-day quiet period before election. They also pointed out that the theory that Alabama was moving forward on, which is that these were somehow not citizens who were registered to vote, that many of them were in fact naturalized citizens, and the court agreed and told Alabama they can't do this purge.
We've talked a lot about the myth of non-citizens voting before, but now we see states taking action on this myth and canceling lawful voters' registration. So, Marc, break it down for us. How or why did Alabama label these voters as potential non-citizens?
Well, look, I mean, we could do a whole episode on why Alabama does what Alabama does. Let's sort of put this in the most factual way we can, I guess, and not disparage them. So essentially, Alabama picked these voters based on the fact that at some point they had non-citizen ID numbers issued by the Department of Homeland Security. Now, there is a lot of reasons why people might have had a non-citizen ID number, but in fact went on to gain U.S. citizenship and then registered to vote because they got the non-citizen ID number before they were citizens, but then became citizens and registered to vote. Well, those people, Paige, got caught up in this purge, right? Those people got flagged by the Secretary of State in this purge and had themselves targeted. And this is the reason why voter list maintenance has to be done carefully. It has to be done after due diligence. It is reason why there is a ban on doing this right on the precipice of an election, right? Because you want to make sure there's a sufficient amount of time that if you're going to be removing people from the rolls, that the state not just gets it right, but that it's not too close to the election so they don't prejudice people who should not have been removed. It is also, Paige, also why so many states initially joined ERIC, the interstate compact between states, to make sure their voter rolls were more accurate and they were getting the most data, and why it was a tragedy when you and I started first flagging a year ago that red states were leaving that compact and making the data that they rely on less accurate.
And Alabama was one of those states. Alabama left ERIC. Had they stayed in ERIC, they would be getting consistent, regular information about voters who may have moved in and out of the state to help them maintain their voter rolls. But instead, Alabama has to do it on their own. A striking fact from the DOJ lawsuit that I want to note is that Alabama said that it was purging over 3,200 potential non-citizens on the rolls. When the DOJ filed their lawsuit, 700 of those voters had alerted the state that they were citizens, that they were eligible to vote, that they needed to reactivate their voter registration, which meant that Alabama had at least a 22% error rate when it came to canceling these voter registrations.
Yeah, that's a minimum error rate. That's not the maximum error rate. That is the minimum error rate that they had. And, it shouldn't go without noting that, Paige, it is an absolute shame whenever any eligible citizen is removed from the voter rolls. It is even more so when the people who have been removed went through the process of becoming U.S. citizens. These are people who came to this country seeing the United States as a beacon of hope and democracy in the world. These are people who left their allegiances to other countries behind so that they become part of the fabric that is America. And then they went through the process of registering to vote to become part of the civic engagement that binds all Americans together. And to have those people who did everything right, who went to the trouble by choice to embrace what America and American democracy stands for, to have those people the victim of this pernicious, illegal purge really is a double shame. So good on the Department of Justice and those other organizations for fighting for this. And also, I'm thankful, as someone who lives in the Commonwealth of Virginia, I am thankful to see the Department of Justice is bringing a similar lawsuit and has brought a similar lawsuit in the state of Virginia. And shame on Glenn Youngkin, the Republican governor. He knows better. He knows better, but he is playing up to the MAGA base because it's cheap political points. And I hope we see the same results in the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Marc, finally in Nebraska, the state Supreme Court ruled this morning that people with prior felony convictions are eligible to register to vote and cast a ballot.
Yeah, this is an interesting case, and it is probably the most textbook case of what MAGA extremism has meant for the Republican Party and its election officials and its state AGs around the country. So for a long time in Nebraska, the law was that people convicted of felonies could only register and vote 2 years after completing all terms of their sentences, including probation and parole. But in April 2024, the legislature passed a law to restore voting rights immediately upon completion of sentences, ending the 2-year waiting period. Now, the governor of Nebraska didn't sign or veto that bill. No courage there. But it became law because that's how the Nebraska Constitution says the process works. But what did the state attorney general do? He issued an opinion saying the law was unconstitutional. And he directed state officials to stop registering individuals convicted of felonies who have not been pardoned, essentially just nullifying the law because he felt like he could nullify that law. Well, guess what? The ACLU filed a lawsuit challenging that and to compel officials to register people with past felony convictions. And the Nebraska Supreme Court, not exactly a bastion of liberalism, but the Nebraska Supreme Court, which has a conservative majority, ruled that people with past felony convictions can register and ordered officials to allow registration. Congratulations to the ACLU, and shame on the Nebraska AG for thinking that he could unilaterally deny these people who were eligible to register and vote their rights, and he could single-handedly nullify state law.
Now, Marc, this ruling came just in the nick of time. The Nebraska Supreme Court heard oral argument in August. They didn't issue, though, that ruling until today. And the state's mail-in and online voter registration deadline is this Friday. Its in-person voter registration deadline is next Friday. And the ACLU said that today's ruling from the court restores voting rights to over 7,000 Nebraskans.
Yeah, look, it's a great ruling, and we wish it had come earlier. We wish a lot of these rulings could be swift, because every time that these states do these things to try to undermine democracy, whether it is the state election board in Georgia, or it's the AG in Nebraska, or it's the Secretary of State in Alabama, every time that the state officials take these steps, they at a minimum create confusion. They at a minimum give ammunition to the election deniers, to the people who don't want free and fair elections, to be able to point to something. And they force the courts to jump in at the last minute to protect voting rights. But here's the good news, and this is a good news story. The courts did step in. In each and every one of these instances, the courts stepped in and did the right thing. A judge in Fulton County did the right thing. A federal judge in Alabama did the right thing. A conservative state Supreme Court in Nebraska did the right thing. So the next time one of your friends or a cynic says, the courts, they won't do the right thing, point them to these 3 cases. Point them to these instances and many, many others that Democracy Docket tracks, of where courts and judges have stepped up and made sure that the right to vote is protected. Now, look, I'm not here to say that things are perfect. I'm not here to say that the courts always get it right. I'm not here to say that the Supreme Court of all is always going to step up and do the right thing. But it's important that we point out that when MAGA extremists take steps to take away fundamental rights, in many instances, it is the judges at the local level. It is the judges at the state Supreme Court levels who are still standing up and doing the right thing. And for that, we can be very, very thankful. And I want to thank each and every one of you for watching this episode. Make sure you're subscribed to Democracy Docket's free daily and weekly newsletters, and we will see you next time.